In a country like Australia, where we as women are well educated, the availability of the pill's pretty universal, and cost is not prohibitive. So the access is there. There's lots of things we can do to avoid being in that position. But if we find ourselves in that position, surely we've got 3, maybe 4 months to make that decision, rather than wait till a child, and it is a child at 35 weeks, 32 weeks, 25 weeks, is in consideration. We women, men help us get pregnant, but we women have got to take a bit of charge of this, because 80,000 abortions per annum in a country like Australia, it's too many.
It's been such a wicked, vexed debate, Peter, because that part of the equation that you've just mentioned hasn't been featured at all, and it is part of the inconvenient truth. I don't know any women who haven't been touched by abortion, either personally or at a very close range through friends and family. There's nothing easy about it. There's nothing about it that doesn't involve soul-wrenching pain at one point or another. That doesn't mean that as a society we aren't able to draw a line in the sand and say this point is not acceptable. I find it incredible, some of the arguments that I've heard in support of this legislation this week, some conflating same-sex marriage bill with this bill as some sort of, equality piece of legislation. What a load of nonsense, what a load of disingenuous BS, quite frankly. This is about how we value human life, what safeguards we put in place, and, abortion should be rare, and on the rare occasion that it has to take place, it should be safe. And I say that as someone, and I've written about this, so I know she won't mind me saying it, but my sister-in-law and my brother were in a position when their daughter was diagnosed with a severe congenital heart defect at 20 weeks. And one of the options that was being suggested strongly to them was a termination. Now, that child is now 15 and happy and healthy. And I know that that's a great story, and not all stories turn out that way. But let's not pretend that would have been a terrible tragedy if she hadn't have been allowed to go full term. And they went full term not knowing what the outcome would be. It's just being painted as black and white. It's not black and white. This legislation you could drive trucks through. There aren't safeguards for the most vulnerable. And like your Voxies demonstrated, this government is so far removed from the electorate of New South Wales, it should be making their head spin.
Caleb, what surprises me is that Gladys Berejiklian, the one complaint people used to have about her was she was, too vanilla. She wasn't, she was sort of a functionary, an administrator type of leader. That wasn't particularly charismatic. She didn't inspire strong opinions. People liked that she delivered, but there was no razzmatazz. I tell you what, if a Labor Premier was delivering this sort of legislation and putting it on the table, there would be hell to pay with the Liberal Party base. And I think that's probably what's angered them the most, is they've been blindsided by this, and it's from their own side.
It's quite remarkable, isn't it? I mean, this is anything but vanilla and an extraordinary piece of legislation from a Liberal government. I do not know of anyone, or very few people, who would support laws around abortion as drastic as this. I think most people, as your Voxies showed, as Gemma just said, believe in the sort of Bill Clinton dictum, which is that it should be safe, legal and rare. Yeah. If you need it, for whatever reason, it is there. But it should not be a fallback option. It should not be something that is available at late term. It's not something that should be available if, you don't end up with the same-sex child that you want. I mean, for heaven's sake, I think of, I've got 6 or 7 aunties. It's ridiculous because my grandparents kept trying. They wanted a boy. Now, if in this circumstance it was totally legal to abort your child because you wanted a son and you had a daughter instead, maybe I wouldn't have my aunties. I have it's not a condition, but I basically have half a left foot. And the doctors told my parents when I was very young that I would likely never walk. I'd be in a wheelchair all my life. Now, that's not happened. I can walk perfectly fine. But if they'd been told that before I was born, because it happened at 5 weeks in the womb, if they'd been told before I was born that I had this problem, I may never walk, you can abort him if you want, I might not be sitting here today. And that's just such a scary thought.
Yeah,
Why and who wants that kind of legislation? No one in normal Australia that I can think of would ever support something like this. It's just insane.
Can I just jump in there, Peter?
Yeah, Gemma, I was just going to say we've spent so much time as a society here in Australia wanting to give dignity to people with a disability that we now have something like this on the table.
Yeah, and what Caleb said resonates so strongly. When this came out over the last week, a very dear friend of mine sent a tweet out and sent me a text message. And, you know, this friend of mine is in a wheelchair and he has a variety of conditions that impact his quality of life as you or I would experience quality of life. And he said he finds it so insulting and so diminishing to him that someone would think his life is less valuable because he's dependent on a wheelchair, because he's dependent on care. You know, he said, thank God for my grandparents who convinced my mother to have me, despite, you know, pressure to the contrary. He lives a life that is worthy. And for us to be saying, I mean, I read some coverage, Peter, that said, oh no, you know, this gender thing shouldn't be included in the legislation because what about diseases like haemophilia? What are we going to do? Knock off all the haemophiliacs? It's just absurd.